Hey everybody, I want to do a little follow-up video on this Levee brakes thing. Thanks for watching it. As usual, a bunch of really cool thoughts and comments and questions with this one. So I thought it'd be fun to just have a little conversation about it. So let's dive into that. Okay, so first comment is from LM Recorders, and it says, at 133.11, you talk about one of the most fleeting things about recording experiences. Whether it's a sound or a part, there's a time and place, and it happens once. I think it's relatively easy to arrive at electric guitar sounds than any other thing if enough of the stuff is the same. But when it comes to any deeply multi-sourced sound, whether it's multi-mics or multi-instruments, drums, it's practically fucking impossible to get back to where you were. And if you can't do it in 15 minutes, you should probably move on. I find guitar parts to be extremely fleeting. When someone comes up with a good sounding and feeling part, you have to get it because it's likely never going to be the same again, and going back to recapture it is usually a disappointment. And that was definitely my experience. And I think the 15-minute rule is a good one. And I'm probably going to have to prescribe to that in the future, because I'll get caught up in like, man, I had it. Seems like nothing's changed. I should be really close. I could just change one little thing and it'll come back. And I don't think it ever does. I think you just have to, just start thinking about moving forward. And I think I'm going to spend less time trying to go backwards in the future. That's good advice. So then William Samuels, 2980, said, regarding the difference between the left and right signals, just spitballing here before I lose my train of thought, but what if those two mics were just the right distance apart and not exactly the same height, and the right mic was accidentally assigned to both the right tape bus and the left tape bus? So I guess what they're saying is that if there's two microphones both picking up the same sound source, and one of the mics accidentally got assigned to both and they got blended together somehow, maybe that would cause that comb filtering thing. And my experience with this comb filtering stuff is that in order for that effect to happen, the signals that are slightly out of sync with each other, however you want to represent that, have to be as close to identical as possible. And so if you had two microphones up over a drum set that are hearing sort of different perspectives on the drum set, I don't think they would be identical enough sounds to be able to cause a cancellation like that. In my case, what I experimented with was, having a mic getting a signal directly from the source, and then also getting that signal reflecting off of a hard surface. And so in theory, it should be, a very, very similar signal. And, testing with the pink noise, I got the same cancellation pattern. But ultimately, when the drums were played, it didn't manifest the same way. And I'm not totally sure why. I think maybe it's possible that if I used a larger surface, maybe this microphone was next to a whole wall. So you have that whole wall, taking reflections and sound from every direction. In my case, I had this kind of tall, thin mirror that's mostly going to do this with any sounds that are coming up from underneath, which is where the drums were. But the sound is really coming from everywhere. And so maybe with a larger reflective surface, it would have actually done something audible, but boy, did it not work. I was so surprised that didn't work. I was so sure it would work because it was so clearly working with the test with the pink noise. But it's an interesting thought. One thing that could do it, if you had two microphones that were really, really well matched to each other and they were a little bit out of sync, but like right next to each other, that could potentially do it. But once you start moving the microphones to different positions, they're hearing different things and those signals become less identical. But in this case, we're only talking about a few inches, and so it might be close enough. So maybe something like that happened. They had two mics next to each other and they got blended together. So nobody says that, but that's another possibility. But it's an interesting thought. Okay, next one is... Oh, yeah, so this is the same gentleman that added a further comment saying, also, I read something many years ago, I believe was in an interview with Andy, where he said one mic was at the top of the stairwell and the other was on the hi-hat. I've never been able to find it again. You know, when you look at the signals that were recorded, assuming that nobody changed the timing between those two things, and I don't think there would be a way to do that back then. They didn't have devices that could do that. You know, the timing difference between those two microphones is really, really minute. You know, it was like 15 samples at 48K. And so that, I think, indicates to me that those two microphones were a similar distance to the snare drum. Because if one was on the hi-hat, it would only be a few feet from the snare drum. And if another one was at the top of the stairwell, which is maybe 15 feet away, you know, that's a difference of probably 12 feet. And so you would see a difference in timing between the left and right sides of like 12 milliseconds. You know, sound travels a foot a millisecond. It's roughly that. So at least what was captured and what is playing back off the record doesn't seem to indicate that. But there's a lot of really weird stories about, you know, what was done. And I had heard a similar thing. You know, people were saying early on that, like, that echo is because they had mics all the way at the top of the stairwell. And that delay came from the distance of that microphone. But, you know, the delay is 225 milliseconds. I measured it very precisely. You can do that in the computer. And, you know, so that means that's a mic that's got to be 225 feet away, or it has to be in a position where there's a wall that is 112.5 feet away, and this mic is only hearing a reflection off of that wall. That's the only way you would get that timing of for a delay. And so it doesn't seem like that was the case. But a lot of people said that early on in my travels when people talk about this drum sound. So I know that rumor has been around for a long time. And there's a really funny story I also heard, like right after the record came out, that everybody was freaking out about that drum sound. Like I said in the original video, people were like, what is this drum sound? What the fuck happened? How did you get this sound? And so right after the release, they had some sort of release party or something right after the record came out, and everybody's freaking out about it. And so they're at some big pub or something. Everybody's partying and celebrating the release of the record. Everybody's there. Andy Johns is there. Bonham's there. The whole band's there. Whatever. Friends. Everybody that worked on the record. They're all celebrating. And so in this bar, everybody's talking about this drum sound. And at one side of the bar is Bonham talking about how his playing and stuff is why that drum sound is so incredible, which is certainly true. And then Andy Johns is on the other side of the bar telling his story that, like, yeah, it sounds so amazing because I did this, that, and the other, and it was the miking and delays and whatever. And those two stories sort of like collided in the middle of the room. And apparently, like, Andy and Bonham almost came to blows over it. They're like, fuck you, you know, whatever. I made that sound awesome, and, you know, whatever. They had a big blowout about it. I don't know if that's true. That was just a story, just a rumor that went around about, you know, that amazing drum sound. It's that big of a deal, I guess. But yeah, so there's lots of crazy stories about, you know, how this happened. Okay, so then there is username Ashdaws, and it says, hey Eric, you mentioned it was mixed at Sunset Sound. You may be aware that there's a Sunset Sound plugin from IK Multimedia that emulates their 3 chambers and 3 plates, including the EMT 140 you used. That may get you even closer to the reverb you're hearing in the final mix. That's a cool suggestion. Here's an interesting thing, and I guess I did not get a chance to cover this detail in this. Yeah, I didn't, but it's in. If you look up the YouTube on the making of Zeppelin 4, there's a video, and there's a gentleman who does a whole series of these. He's done it on a bunch of really great records. But there's a moment in that video that he puts in quotes. So somewhere Andy Johns was interviewed and said this about the mixing of the record, that album was initially mixed at Sunset Sound, and then they went back to England with the mixes and listened to the mixes, I believe, at Olympic, a studio that they were more familiar with. And he says the first mix came on and it sounded dreadful. And then the next mix came on and it sounded terrible. And apparently what happened was Sunset Sound had just installed new speakers, and I guess they weren't dialed in yet or whatever. And at the very least, Andy Johns was not used to these speakers at all, and it really fucked him up. And he was, I don't know, EQing everything wrong and making choices that made it sound really, really screwed up. Apparently the first round of mixing at Sunset was a disaster. And so they scrapped all of those mixes, and then the album was actually finally mixed at Island Records Studios, Chris Blackwell's place. So that's apparently what Andy Johns himself said. He even says, like, I'm surprised they didn't fire me after that first round of mixing. But, you know, Jimmy Page said, let's go give it another go at Island Studios. And so that's the final mixes that were kept. So I guess that means that it wasn't ultimately mixed at Sunset Sound, which I always thought it was. I've had that understanding for a long time. So, you know, I'm not totally sure what is true there. I'm just going by the quotes, you know, around a statement, you know, how Andy Johns was quoted. That interview can be found somewhere to try and confirm it, but that's what they said, or that's what one person said. Okay. Okay, so this is sort of unrelated to the Zeppelin thing, but I like to try and respond to these when they come up. They're valid, and I think they deserve a response. So this is Zoo Took 3422, and it says, not sure why YouTube recommended this meaningless for me. As much as I respect Eric and as a master producer, music engineer, and YouTuber, these ads are just annoying. Once I know that there are no meaningful content from an account, I will never click on a video from that source again. I fully understand that Eric wants to steer viewers to his platform to get more paid, but pure advertisement is not going to cut it. Okay, so I totally understand. You know, for those of you out there that want to go to YouTube and click on a video and watch it for free, you don't mind the ads and all that stuff, I totally understand, and I respect that. And so what I'm trying to do is flag it anytime it is one of these things where it is really just an advertisement to try and get people to go to the website and, you know, pay $1 or $2 to watch a video. And so for this gentleman, Zook Took 3422, on my videos, and you know, obviously you can unsubscribe from the YouTube channel and you won't get notifications anymore. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about YouTube's algorithm. But if any of my videos pop up and they have that big red and orange banner on them that says highlights, you can just skip it, you know, because it really is just an ad saying like, hey, there's a new video on my website. And again, like, I wish I could do this for free on YouTube for the rest of my life, but it won't work. It's not sustainable for me. So I'm trying to, you know, do it in a way that works. And for anybody that's not come from that, I totally get it. And there's plenty of awesome free stuff on YouTube to check out. Okay, this is Ian Fate 170. It says, do you think the Kive Compex would be good for getting a similar sounding compression? I haven't tried it yet, but I'm definitely going to. I've had that ADR F760 Compex compressor for a long time, and I have to confess, I've never really given it the attention that it really deserves. And this round of experimentation has confirmed that. You know, I've always been very attached to my distressors and 1176s and certain tube compressors for drums that I've always liked and have always gotten me good results. And I just didn't really have the patience for that thing that it deserves. And that's over. Like, I was blown away by that F760 on this experiment, man. It resoundingly beat my 1176s, and that's a big deal for me, for sure, because I love those 1176s on drums. They're incredible. So the Compex is going to be a more significant part of my world moving forward, and I'm definitely going to check out this plugin. As you might know, Kive is the gentleman behind designing the plugins for Kive is the same person, I believe, that I worked on for the Unfairchild plugin. So he's a person I definitely know very well, and he's very capable. So I'm hoping he really captured, you know, the heart and soul of that compressor, because it's incredible. I was blown away by that thing. Okay. So then we got Steve Ogan 7776. Just finished watching, amazing and really entertaining. What about some downloadable files of your loop? Okay, you know, as I was getting towards the end of this, I started thinking, man, this would be another cool opportunity for a mix contest. So I think we should totally do that. I will make these files available, the ones of the 160 mics that I used, completely unprocessed, because I definitely still have the raw, direct from the mic preamp files, and make them available to y'all. And I would love to see if you all can get those signals to sound closer to the final thing than I did. That would be incredible. I would certainly learn something. I really, really worked hard on that, try and get as close as I can. But, you know, you can leave in the comments if you all are interested in doing that. I would love to do it. We can put it up. We'll figure out a prize or something and do a little mix contest. It'll be the last one was super fun. I think I know better how to do it, so it'll be better organized for everybody. And yeah, I think that'll be good. Okay, so then this is username Zirlfer, I think. Okay, it says, hey Eric, listening to the original, there are a couple obnoxiously loud hi-hat hits in certain spots. Do you think it's likely they had someone watching the faders doing a live fader move the same way you clip gained down the hi-hats? If they had two fingers, one on the main fader and one on the post fader send, that might also replicate the lack of hi-hat in the delay. I mean, that would be quite a fader performance for sure. I mean, because there's, you know, I don't know what it is, four hi-hat hits that are by themselves for every bar that is played. And so it would be like, boom, bow, bow, you know. And so that's a lot of moving to do, and you know it's possible. I've done things that crazy back in the days when I didn't have automation, so I wouldn't put it past them. I think the other likely possibility is that, you know, from what I understand, the reason that the hi-hat is so loud is that the compressor is responding massively to the kick drum and the snare drum, because in the original signal, those are unquestionably way louder than the hi-hat. And so it slams down on the kick drum and slams down on the snare drum, but comes back up for when the hi-hat hits, and it makes the hi-hat sound way louder. And I think that's what's going on. And just depending on the speed of the release, there might be some other weird anomalies going on in there, you know, depending on the part, but maybe you're talking about just in the intro, those 2 bars in the intro. And those are played pretty consistently, so it should be pretty consistent across those 2 bars, but that's why the hi-hat sounds so much louder when it's by itself and it's not being hit at the same time with the kick or the snare, because of the compression on there. That's my understanding, but you know, being that, yeah, you know, the other possibility is that, and I'm just realizing this now, and I can't believe I didn't think about this before, is that God, I'm a dummy, because I bet this is it. I bet the signal was sent to that delay before the drums were compressed. I bet that's what happened. And then the delay is mixed in with the drums, and maybe the drums were sent to a bus which went to tracks on the tape machine, and that's where the compression was applied, was at that stage. And so I bet that's what happened. I can't believe I didn't think of that before. But good question. And I think it may have navigated us to a possible solution. That's an experiment that needs to happen. Okay, so thank you for that, Zero Fur. Okay. So then we have from Studio Underjord. And the comment is, that iPhone thing made me lose it. I think the reason you missed out on the last few percent is that your gear's too healthy. You need to build up a thick sweat analog nicotine coating on everything from cymbals to tape heads. Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. You know, there's been a few comments about substances that were probably involved in the recording of this song. One of which is that, you know, Bonham drank relentlessly. He was unquestionably an alcoholic, and sadly it killed him. If you look in the video, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a little planting pot, a flower pot on the left-hand side of the drum kit. This was actually Grace's idea, because I've told this story to her before. But I put that there kind of as a joke, but kind of to just really have it there, because when I met a gentleman named, he would go by the name Mac when he was credited on records, but he was an assistant engineer on the Led Zeppelin Presence album. And he was one of the people when I was playing in T-Ride and the label wanted us to work with a producer and we had no interest in that. We just gave him a list. You know, they said, "Well, just meet with some people," and we just gave him a list with people that we wanted to meet. And so we basically put on the list anybody that's worked with Led Zeppelin or Queen or T-Rex, like any of those bands. We're happy to meet with them, just because it'd be cool to talk to him, you know. And so Mac was available to meet with us, and we did, and got to talk to him and talk to him about his experience recording Led Zeppelin. And he had some unbelievable stories to tell, specifically about John Bonham. And so the first of which was that before the band showed up, you know, their gear shows up first, and then they get everything set up for them, and then they arrive, and then they'll, you know, start recording or whatever. And so Mac spent a bunch of time dialing in a drum sound for him. And so this is in the 70s when people were really into like individually miking everything and all this stuff, and he worked really hard to get this drum sound. And so the band got in the room, they got comfortable, you know, they played their first song, and it's like, okay, come on in the control and, you know, hear what we got. And so they listened to it, and apparently, like, the playback barely got started, and, you know, Bonham, like, stops the tape and goes, "My drums sound like a bunch of fucking cardboard boxes," and walks out into the sound room and just starts pulling all the microphones away from the drum set, you know. He obviously really liked hearing the sound of his drums in a room. It was a big deal to him, and that's what he wanted, so he did that. Also, apparently on that session, so these are stories that I heard directly from Mac, who was there and witnessed all this stuff himself, experienced it firsthand himself. The other story that he told was that for these sessions, and this is a little later, I forget the year Presence was recorded, but it was probably 75, 76, maybe somewhere around there. And so during the recording of this record, Bonham kept a bucket next to his drum set, on the left side of his drum set, to vomit in. And he was drinking apricot brandy the whole time, just drinking it like water the whole time, and would just lean over and vomit in a bucket, and would even lean over and vomit while he was playing. I mean, it's like right out of a Monty Python skit. And so apparently, every once in a while, bucket would have to get emptied. And so that was the job of Bonham's drum tech. And so when that time came, you know, Bonham would motion for him to come over and grab the bucket to empty it. And so he would scurry over and grab and empty the bucket. And apparently one time when he came over to grab the bucket, as the guy leaned over to pick up the bucket, you know, Bonham reached down to, like he was going to hand it to him, but he grabbed it and just dumped it over his head. And so not the coolest move in the world, I would say, you know, not so awesome. You know, I have nothing but endless respect for that dude's drumming, but he apparently at times could be pretty horrifyingly bad to other people. So just as sort of a nod to that story, I kept, I couldn't find an actual bucket hanging around in the barn. We do have some milk pails around, but I couldn't find one. So I put that little planter bucket next to me, in case that was an important part of the sound. So it was there. So there are lots of stories like that floating around as well about Mr. Bonham, Mr. Henry Bonham. Okay. So then there's another one. This is Nicholas F. Starr. And his comment is it just me, or is the beat even more badass without the echo? And, I don't know. I think there's no bad version of Bonham's playing. There's somebody that has posted the entire isolated drum take for Whole Lotta Love. And it is fucking mind-blowing. I have like a short snippet of it that I got at one point of it isolated, which sounds amazing. It's not the whole song, but man, when you hear that whole song, the way that feel and it swings just a little bit, it is so incredible, man. That guy's, the feel and momentum of his playing was unreal. There's really been nothing like it. But I agree. The one without the delay is just kind of just hard and stark, and it sounds really cool. It all sounds incredibly tough. He was just that drummer. So thank you for all the cool thoughts and comments and stuff about the video. Thanks for watching it. I think when I was editing the video and sort of finishing up working on the thing, I had time to sort of reflect on what I was doing, and I was listening to it, and I was, having with headphones, like listening to the A-Bing between the two, and I've had some thoughts since I finished it. Things I would probably do differently if I ever did this again, and knowing me, I probably will, but not soon. So these were some of the variables along the way, choices that I made that I think I would do differently. So you saw the setup, where the drums were sort of in this little cove that was created by, the ISO booths in there. And then I used gobos to sort of finish out an enclosure. And then I experimented with hard and soft surfaces, both on the back wall, which are glass, those are windows, and I pulled the curtains because earlier in the process it seemed like it was a little bit too splashy and bright and harsh sounding. And then two of the gobos had hard side, soft side, and I experimented with that, and I chose the soft side. There were still a couple glass gobos on the sides where I didn't have any option. Although I did experiment with hanging blankets over them, and that got too much. The drums started to sound a little bit too claustrophobic. But I think in hindsight, I think it would have been better to leave all of those surfaces really hard. And when I A/B the two now, I'm hearing that on the original, there's just a denser early reflection, like really dense, bright early reflection around those drum hits. And I probably wouldn't have had to EQ as much brightness in, and a lot of that sort of high frequency energy might have been, covered more by some nice bright early reflections in there that made those impacts more dense, So that's something I was hearing there. And then I think the other thing I would have done is that the big room in the barn, because there's so much space in there, it tends to accumulate stuff. It's just a very convenient place of you're moving something around. It's like, where should I put this? Oh, just put it in the big room, because there's always space for stuff in that room. But it's gotten filled up with a lot of carpets and, cushions for outdoor furniture that aren't used in the winter and stuff. And there's a bunch of shit got piled in there that's very absorptive. And I think I should get all of that stuff out of there. And so the ultimate room reverb would have a longer, denser decay as well, and it would just all sound a little thicker and have a longer decay to it. So it's another thing I would do differently. The other thing in hindsight that I would do differently is I think I would stick to the Bonham drumsticks, because as I said, ultimately I use two different drumsticks, and it's really it's a reflex that I have because it's messed up drum sounds for me so many times in the past. Like if I can't get a nice low body and impact in the overheads for the drum, for the snare drum, it's very difficult to recreate that other ways. You can, but it ends up sounding more artificial, and so I really like to make sure I have plenty of that in the overheads. And I think in this case, there ended up being too much when I'm really just sort of trying to duplicate the character of what that original thing was. They definitely did not have as much of that real fundamental, like 200 hertz punch in the snare drum in those microphones. And there's a moment where you hear the difference on the snare drum between playing with the Bonham stick and the Bill Stewart stick, and it's a big difference. The snare drum sounds hugely different in the low end. It's kind of counterintuitive because the lighter stick has way more low end in it. You know, I wouldn't guess that, but through years of doing this, I've learned that that's the way it tends to go. That the big, thick, heavy sticks kind of choke out the low end on the snare drum. So that was interesting. You know, in general, I will continue to go for that for drum sounds I'm getting for myself. But in this case, you know, my sort of natural instincts of like, oh, I always got to get as much low end on the snare drum as possible, so it steered me a little bit away from what this original thing was. And so if I did it again, stick to the Bonham sticks, because they were definitely better on the hi-hat for sure. That was unquestionable. All right, so there you go. If you have any more thoughts or questions or whatever about this episode, there's certainly plenty to go after there. Put them in here. I'm happy to check them out. I'll either type in responses or do another, you know, follow-up video like this. But again, thanks for watching. This was super fun. I really did actually learn quite a lot in this process. You know, it's what I love about these things. Some things, you know, those ADR 760 compressors, those are going to be a big part of my life moving forward. So that's cool. You know, I really got to spend some time getting to know that drum, you know, where to record drums in that barn. I'm still getting to know that room, so that was huge. I love that cove. I think it's a great place to put the drums, you know. So yeah, tons of cool stuff got learned. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.